Yeah, it doesn't even touch that. It's just talking about double-mindedness. That's what we got out there today. If he's, it's kind of like back. You probably remember this story, and I think it's 1 Kings 18. Old Elijah. He's kind of a Bible hero of mine. He stood up and he said to the people, "If the Lord is God, serve him, and if Baal is God, serve him. Choose ye this day who's going to be the Lord." You know, and that's kind of where we're at today. What do you think?
I could not agree more. And certainly we are. And I was having a discussion with my own pastor this morning, and I know Bill Rowland wants to ask you a question, but I want to follow up to this point because you asked me the question. I think we have seen a stark decline in America by any standard of measurement, particularly so over the last 40 to 50 years, say after World War II. This was when that you had an increasing amount of Zionist influence within our institutions, be it the church, our government, media, etc. And as they have become more and more dominant, the attacks on God have gone more and more without opposition from our people or his people. We are seeing America fall. God is the one who raises nations up. He is the one who is going to punish nations. And that leads me to my next question. Then I'm going to toss it over to Bill. The declining state of our nation seems to be steadily increasing in recent years, as we just established. But also there seems to be a volatile yet unpredictable weather pattern manifesting in our nation. It's almost as if we're being punished. Do you take that literally, Pastor Peters? Are we experiencing the wrath of an angry God? And if so, what factors do you think are facilitating such indignation?
Well, I certainly do take it as being the wrath of the ever-living God, and that's something is not preached from the average church pulpit. They preach a God that's kind of like a long-haired, gray-bearded, doting grandfather says, no. No, they don't picture the God that the prophets, be it Ezekiel or Isaiah or Micah or Hosea. You know, Hosea said, if you sow to the wind, he was speaking to a nation. He says, if you sow to the wind, you're going to reap the whirlwind. And, you know, this year we have had more tornadoes, and a tornado is a whirlwind, than any year on history, and bigger tornadoes. And most definitely, we are experiencing what is called in Scripture the wrath and anger of the day of the Lord events. God punishes. Be not deceived. God is not mocked. Whatsoever a man soweth, that he shall also reap. Now, that's Scripture, whether it's preached or not, whether the people out there listening to you and I right now like it or not, that's the way it is. And I want to tell you something else. I guess I'm off preaching, James, but give me this. A nation of men better not be deceived. A nation of men will reap what they sow, and we have now seen that we're reaping the whirlwind. Most definitely, I believe it's because of the wrath of God, and it's because we no longer allow the law of God to be the supreme law of this land. Does that answer that question?
More than I expected. It exceeded expectations, Pastor. Bill, I know you have a question for our guest.
Pastor Peters, this is Bill Rowland. I'm a long-time listener and first-time interviewer.
Well, thank you.
I'd like to ask you what 20th century ministers or pastors or theologians influenced you in your ministry? Who do you count as heroes of 20th century pastors?
Well, that's a good question. You've probably never heard of him. However, in the 30s, he was a well-known evangelist. His name was A. Word. Actually, in the late 20s going into the 30s, he was a great evangelist. He had been a World War I war hero, a prize fighter, an opera singer. He was quite a guy. And he was converted. And he got on fire for the Lord. And that's back in the old days of the tent meetings. And he, in his own way, was a Billy Sunday. In fact, I remember him telling this story. You see, he was one of my teachers in Bible college. He was an old man at the time, had a beautiful white mustache and beard, and he was tough and broad-shouldered. He taught us, he says, don't any of you become a preacher. None of you. Unless you can't stand to be anything else. And this man, boy, he was converting back in the late 20s people to the Lord in tent meetings by the thousands. And in fact, a man that had made women corsets in those days. In those days, women's corsets was a big deal. I guess a few women today could stand to wear some, but that's another point. I'd rather see them wearing a corset than showing their belly buttons with tattoos and a ring, but I'm off point. But anyway, this guy, and I don't think we have any trouble figuring out, he's probably one of those so-called chosen, he was an international merchant, came to him and said, Mr. Word, he says, I can make you more famous than Billy Sunday. He says, because you're better than Billy Sunday. And he said, Billy Sunday didn't have the technology that we got available today, speaker systems, radio was coming in and so forth. And he offered a deal with Word, but there was a couple things that he wasn't going to allow Word to teach on. One was baptism, remission of sins. The other one was tithing, interestingly enough. But anyway, it's a long way around to answer your question. That man inspired me. That man taught me. And most have never heard of that man, but I patterned a lot of my preaching and teaching after him.
Well, I think that's a very appropriate question by Bill, and a great answer, of course, by you, Pastor Peters. And it leads me to my next question, which I think is along the same lines. There's not enough Pastor Pete Peters behind the pulpit today. There's not enough Pastor Word behind the pulpits today. What is your explanation to the fact that our nation has become more corrupt, more sinful, more full of immorality, crime, and homosexuality than ever before, but we have more churches than ever before? How do you reconcile that?
You know, James, if I give you, there are some levels to that answer. If I give you the one level, it's liable to turn your audience off big time, but I think I might do it anyway.
Hold nothing back.
All right. Let's give an illustration. Let's say that you had a society that was full of termite inspection companies. Some were incorporated, some were independent, some were large, some were small. And their job was to eradicate termites and be termite inspectors. Yet in that society, every building was termite infested and crumbling from termite infestation. Now, there'll be some that say, fighting termites is a tough job and we need more termite companies. There'll be some that say we got to get more money to the termite exterminators so they can do a better job. But someone just might start thinking this. First person might think they're not doing their job as termite inspectors. But how about this? They're not against termites. They're for it. And their job, though they claim to be against termites, is to protect termites from being exterminated. Pretty wild illustration, isn't it?
I love the way how pastors illustrate things. I mean, I get the point. And I
the point is, I think that the churches today not only are not doing their job as termite inspectors, I am of the position now, these phony baloney Judeo-Christian churches full of Baal priests are doing their job, and that's protecting the termites, the sin, because we've got more sin in this country, more divorce, more cancer, more of the curses of Deuteronomy 28 than we've ever had before, and we got more churches than we've ever had before. And guess what they've been preaching to us since 1948, James?
Tell me.
If we bless Israel, God will bless us.
There you go.
I say we can't stand any more of these blessings, man.
It's not a laughing matter, but I love the way you articulated that. Pastor, this is a recurring theme on our program, and it's something, it's a belief, it's a tenet, it's a philosophy that you and I share. If I may be so bold as to say that I share anything with a man of your intellect, but absolutely, I could not agree with you more. This is something that the church is going to have to address. These are false prophets. The church is doing more of a disservice to Christians than the ADL themselves, if that's possible, and if people could believe that. You're right. I mean, you've got all sorts of anti-Christian philosophies being taught from the pulpit today,
yes.
and people are eating it up. I mean, churches have become tolerant of sin. Churches have become tolerant of homosexuality. Certain denominations have. I know Bill has something along this line that he'd like to talk about. Bill?
Yeah, Pastor Peters, I want to put you on the spot a little bit. I'm going to give you some names, and could you give us a response to them? If you want to say no comment, that's fine. But I'm interested to know what you think of some of the